As a reminder, this webinar is being recorded and the PowerPoint will be available for your reference moving forward into the future on the AATE website. Welcome to this webinar, which is called Making the Case for Theater Education in Your Community. My name is Jeff Poulin, and I'm joined by my colleague Carla Rivera from Chicago, who will be discussing some of her work as well as a number of the theories that we are discussing in this webinar today. We'll break this hour up into a couple of sections so you can follow along. We'll begin with a short introduction. This series has 4 parts. Last month, we covered Making the Case for Theater Education, the basics. Today, we're talking about making the case in your community. Next month, we'll be discussing making the case with the government. And then in April, we'll conclude with making the case as part of your practice. Our goals for this session today are to examine the connections between theater education and other sectors, to interrogate effective partnerships, and to identify actionable steps to take in your school or in your community. My name is Jeff Poulin, and I'll be your facilitator today. I spoke by myself on the last webinar, presenting a number of the theories that are relevant to making the case for theater education. And over the next 3 webinars, I'll be joined by colleagues from around the country who have a certain expertise that we all can benefit from. You can read a little bit more about my work on the AATE website through my biography. But here I'm serving in my capacity as the Managing Director for Creative Generation. And we work to inspire, connect, and amplify the work of individuals and organizations like your own that are committed to cultivating the creative capacities of the next generation. So I'm thrilled to be here with you. To recap last month's webinar, we questioned how we all as a field think about theater education and how we talk about the work and its impact. We talked about compelling data and effective storytelling and how that can lead to advocacy for change within our public policies, our social policies, and within our communities. We discussed the communications process, how we are the sender, develop a message which persists through the noise to reach a receiver and give us feedback on what we're discussing. We also discussed the effective storytelling process, where we think about the big ideas and the impact of our work and how we can effectively communicate that using our greatest strength in theater education, storytelling. Then we began to discuss the trajectory of data and how we structure data into those stories that we tell, articulating the impact of our work. And lastly, we looked at contextualizing localized data, regional data, or national data to help make the case for theater education in our own specific communities. So today, I want to be thinking about the connections between theater education and more broadly the arts as it relates to our communities. We all know about what an excellent theater education can do, and you'll see here on the screen the recognition that has come about in the last several years presented by the Tony Awards. And through these shining examples, we've seen how theater education can revolutionize a school, can change a community. And just last year, with the recognition of the theater educator from Parkland, Florida, how theater education can change the dialogue around a relevant topic in a country. Americans for the Arts last year put out a new tool called the Arts and Social Impact Explorer. You can visit this on their website, but I share this graphic because funded by the Mellon Foundation, this work has connected the arts to positive impacts in a number of sectors, including infrastructure, social justice, culture and heritage, diplomacy, the economy, environment, faith, wellness, and of course, education, our own area of expertise. However, I would challenge us to look beyond these simple categorizations, because what we know is that theater education can drastically impact every sector of every part of human life. The United Nations put forward 17 Sustainable Development Goals, or SDGs, as they described them, just last year. This followed up on the Millennium Goals from the early 2000s, and give us a framework for how we can view the different sectors in which community life is impacted all around the world. I also find the connection between their logo, which you'll see in the bottom right-hand corner, and that derived in the Social Impact Explorer to be very similar. Here you'll find the 17 factors to successful community life as developed by the United Nations and agreed to by a number of countries around the world. And you'll hear our office sidekick here, the dog, making some noise in agreement. These sustainable development goals give us a new way to think about the intersections, particularly related to healthy communities and the healthy development of young people. One example of how the Sustainable Development Goals have been touched upon in relation to the arts comes out of Nigeria and an organization called the Creative Youth Community Development Initiative, or Solution 17 is their tagline. Here they look at those 17 Sustainable Development Goals and work specifically with young creatives through the arts, including theater, to come up with new and different ways to envision a future for things like quality education or clean water. They've funded and supported young creatives from around the country of Nigeria to use their artistic endeavors to pose new solutions and help solve these problems. Their work has been recognized by the United Nations and is being exported all around the world. Right here in the United States, in our sister field, dance education, there's a program called Dancing Grounds based out of New Orleans. They deal with community-centered approaches through dance to help young people and their communities grapple with the challenges facing their community. Earlier this year, they put on a festival centered on gentrification and displacement, particularly related to the long-term impact of Hurricane Katrina and racial justice issues facing their community. The event itself was planned by their teen company, led by young people, supported by adults. And what they did is they choreographed site-specific pieces to bring attention and pose solutions to some of the largest issues facing their own community, and to help decision makers, like their city officials, come to terms with what their viewpoints were as young people through the creative art form of dance. I share these examples because both, whether in Nigeria or whether in New Orleans, showcase how the connection between issues of displacement and gentrification or around these global issues of the Sustainability Development Goals can be impacted by arts and young people. Throughout both programs, there were two keys to success. The first is around partnership, and the second is around youth voice. I want to unpack those a little bit for you today. Effective partnerships, according to the IRIS organization out of the UK, have several components. A shared commitment to goals and objectives, specificity in the roles of each partner, cooperation and a focus on quality and innovation, and more. There's numerous frameworks like this available out there that one can consult when crafting effective partnerships. But really, in the arts education field, there's been one dominant narrative for the past 5 years or so. The big takeaway, however, in whatever partnership is there, is that relationships move at the speed of trust. I'll just say that again. Relationships move at the speed of trust. Regardless of the tactic that you want to employ as part of your partnership, it must be based on trust and how the organizations work together, whether mission aligned or not, whether goal oriented or not, whether role clarified or not, when the two organizations and the people within trust each other. Now, again, like storytelling in our last session, building trust and camaraderie among peers is one of the strengths we have as theater educators. So we're uniquely positioned to form really meaningful and long-lasting partnerships. Now, as I was saying, there's been a trend in the past 5 years or so within the arts education field called collective impact. It's a type of partnership that bring together a diverse set of organizations and individuals to move forward a common idea. According to the Stanford Social Innovation Review, There are five key components of collective impact. The first is a common agenda. The second, shared measurements. The third, mutually reinforcing activities. The fourth is continuous communication. And finally, the fifth is around backbone support. This type of organization for partnerships has proven successful when bringing together folks from diverse fields around a common goal. You could have someone from the housing sector and someone from the arts sector working together with that common agenda, their shared measurements, their mutually reinforcing activities through continuous communication, and with the backbone support of one of the organizations. However, I've conducted some research with the support of the Claire Rose Foundation that has examined how collective impact for arts education has actually worked out in our field. Because we sit at a space with the arts and education as equal partners in the field, not supporting the arts more than education, not supporting education more than the arts. However, what happens when you bring together those cross-sector partners, people from outside of the arts or education fields? And we conducted a study looking at the literature first, examining examples of several national initiatives, and providing a critique on what we learned. And what we learned was specific to stakeholder engagement, first of all, and youth engagement, second of all. When it comes to stakeholder engagement, what we need to know when crafting these long-lasting, high-impact partnerships is to think about how we are engaging the stakeholders who are most affected by the work that we're doing. Whether that's bringing in educators, young people, parents, or community participants, thinking about this spectrum, which is shown on your screen right now, moving towards that ideal of true partnership is really important. And what you'll see in this graphic is that it takes greater effort to engage these folks in a truly meaningful way. The same goes for youth engagement. Here you'll see Heart's Ladder, which is a common graphic used to display different ways of engaging young people in the work. There's numerous degrees of participation, and there's several ways that we can often manipulate young people into participating, which is never our goal. But in these partnerships, which we often think of between large institutions, we have to not only think of those stakeholders who are impacted to be engaged, but in theater education, we specifically need to consider the young people. And it can be as simple as holding meetings out of school hours, providing snacks or support for transportation, changing language to become more accessible. Here, in the top section, in the degrees of participation, you'll see a number of ways that young people can be involved, and all are okay. Working with young people is a true commitment for organizations to go through, and it takes time and resources and a shift in organizational culture. So moving through this ladder and not just jumping to that top rung sometimes is the right step for organizations. I say this to not discourage you, but to encourage you to take those steps necessary to engage young people to craft the meaningful partnerships that will drive your work forward. In our next session, I'm going to turn this over to my colleague Carla Rivera, who's coming to us from the city of Chicago, who's going to share with you some of her own personal experience as a teaching artist, an advocate, and now an executive director of a theater organization that's engaged in social justice work. She'll tell us about these types of partnerships, the strengths of youth engagement, and to provide some real concrete examples of some of the bigger theories that we were just talking about. So Carla, welcome. Thanks for being here.
Thanks so much for having me. So, and thank you all for having me. I'm really excited to be here and talk with you all about the role of theater practitioners in arts ed, community engagement, and advocacy. We can move on to the next slide. And we'll go to the next one. A little bit of background about me. I'm from Puerto Rico, but I was raised in Chicago. I'm a Chicago Public Schools graduate. I'm a product of arts education, and particularly theater education, which I truly believe, up to now and perhaps beyond, has played a key role in how I view and how I operate out in the world. I am a film school graduate at Columbia College and also went to New York University for playwriting. And it is from that studies at New York University that I landed my first position as a teaching artist. And I'll tell you that becoming a teaching artist truly kind of broke open and really opened an entirely different new world in terms of the impact of our work as a sector, and has stayed with me through all of these years. So I began my journey at Northern Stage in White River Junction, Vermont, in a program called Project Playwright, where we taught 5th and 6th graders in schools how to write 10-minute plays, utilizing utilizing books like Tales of a Fourth Grade Nothing, where they would read the text, see the play, but then we would teach them story structure, and through that they would write their own 10-minute plays. That program completely fundamentally shifted me and the way that I saw myself utilizing theater to reach communities. I had been steeped in social justice work and social work and civil rights work, just kind of through osmosis within the work that my family was doing. So to see it in this context, in working directly with schools and teachers to make sure that we were working together to achieve their learning goals, and then ultimately get the students to a place where they could then create their own work, was wonderful. I knew that I wanted to take this work back home to Chicago, so I worked at the Puerto Rican Cultural Center at the Bate Urbano in order to do this work. There, which was a more specific kind of work, was utilizing theater to really dissect community issues and social justice issues that mattered to the students. And so with that, we worked together to devise a play, and which they had various roles in, from performance to being part of the crew in various areas. And we really did. We focused on craft. We examined social justice and community challenges, and imagined theater's role in critical conversations happening within our communities. So with all of the work that we did do, we always included a moment where there was a talkback, or there were partnerships either within the community or outside of the community to really drive messaging and have a dialogue between the young people and those that we were engaging. And we can go on to the next slide. I spent a lot of time moving out of the teaching artist space and into community-based organizations and nonprofit leadership, while also having my artistic practice. And so that was direct service, fundraising, communications, advocacy. I'm also a company member at Second Story in Chicago. I was a collaborator at Free Street and did independent projects. And if we go to the next slide, what you'll see is what should be really a Venn diagram of the kind of how all of these different areas intersect, really warrant in the work that I was doing. So while in all of these different places we were having conversations around all of the various issues that you see on this slide, we weren't having it with each other. And so often, the theater folks would get called in to have an ephemeral moment, but there wasn't necessarily a seat at the table to really engage in the conversation and moving the work forward. So it was very siloed and very disjointed, in my opinion, in terms of how this work could really merge and meld and really identify a place for us to be able to advocate and utilize the craft to move the needle forward. And so from that emerge, on the next slide that you'll see, are some essential questions, right? I consistently was always asking myself, whenever I was in a meeting or whenever I was at a rehearsal or wherever I was in a place where we were devising work, is who's at the table? Who needs to be at the table? Or quite often, why aren't we at the table? What is the story being told in these other sectors? Who's telling it? And how do we leverage our platform to ensure as many voices are reflected in the work? And what are the points of intersection outside of the sector to enhance our work? And then through that, I eventually landed at my most recent position before Free Street in arts education advocacy at Ingenuity. Ingenuity is an organization that was founded in 2011 to increase arts education access, equity, and quality in Chicago public schools. As a director of public affairs, I really tapped into a broader network that led to an incredible amount of systems change in the city of Chicago, where we now have a majority of CPS schools that are rated strong or excelling in the arts. In addition to that, there were two kind of flagship moments that I had in relationship to the work. And on the next slide, you'll see the Illinois Arts Indicator Workgroup. Through this, we engaged a diverse work group of 27 members from across the state. And that was everyone from practicing artists to education policy experts to the teachers' unions to practicing artists themselves. And we engaged in over 500 combined hours of conversation over a year, narrowed the measure down from 42 potential measures to one composite. And so we had our guiding principles. We constantly asked ourselves, who wasn't in the room? What are we missing? What are we including? And every single one of those moments, we also included student voice in that piece where, you know, we would include kind of a grounding moment where a young person would talk about the impact of arts education. And that included all of the artistic disciplines, but theater and dance turned out to be some of the most impactful testimony that we had throughout that work. And the potential impact for this, and it looks like we will have a vote going up in March on whether or not a recommendation will be adopted. And if our recommendations are adopted, the arts indicator would apply to all Illinois schools. And that would ensure equitable access to arts education for all students across the state of Illinois, more opportunities for arts partnerships, arts integration, and innovation. And Illinois would be the first state in the nation to have a distinct weighted indicator for the arts. This impact is immeasurable, and you know, I'm absolutely most looking forward to the opportunities for the partnerships that already exist, really largely in Chicago, but also the data that we have seen shows that it's already happening across the state of Illinois. So to see that grow would be really wonderful. In addition to the work that we did on ESSA, we recently, in the last year, welcomed a new mayor. And Mayor Lightfoot, as a candidate, was the only candidate to release Advancing Arts and Culture in Chicago, a cultural platform. I was lucky to be part of a convening of arts organizations that was brought together through the Joyce Foundation, the Alphawood Foundation, and Arts Alliance Illinois to develop what may be the nation's first cultural Bill of Rights, which is what are the rights and responsibilities of arts organizations? What are the rights of our residents? What are the rights and responsibilities of city government in making sure that the interests of the arts community are really founded and included in the work? How is our seat at the table? And so we worked on this document over the last year, and our hope is that later on this year we'll actually see its adoption. All of that work, from being a teaching artist to an advocate, you know, has also led me to my current role at Free Street. Free Street is a 50-year-old organization. We're entering our 51st season. And since 1969, we've been at the forefront of the movement to create affordable, inclusive, and innovative theater in communities across Chicago. We create original devised work. So unless we are bringing in other artists Through our in-house program, you'll not see a play proper with our work because we're consistently engaging communities in creating and devising the work that they often want to see because they don't see themselves in the work. We do our best to eliminate the geographical and the economic barriers that often our families feel, particularly on Chicago's South and West Sides, when it comes to experiencing theater. In order for us to do that, on the next slide, you'll see, we bring people together from all walks of life and levels of experience into our work. We do that through ethnographic research where we're interviewing community members one-on-one. We're often bringing those community members into our shows. So we provide theatrical training so that they know, exactly where to be within the space, but also, it really is like get in where you fit in. We will help you do the rest, but your stories and your place in this conversation is incredibly important. Our youth ensemble, which is explores issues that are relevant and resonant with Chicago teens, and also engage in that same research process and workshop process in order to engage the largest swaths of community members from across the city in order to create not just compelling theater, but informed theater that is reflective of the city and its residents. We have what I call the best worst business model, which means, or actually our artistic director coined that, but all of our shows are pay what you can. And we have free co-programming for children so families don't have to worry about paying for a babysitter when they come to our shows. And even on the operations, the artistic side, children are welcome in the space in order for us to be able to do the work that we do. We also have an additional satellite space called the Storyfront in the back of the yards community. And what is really interesting about that space, where we also do devised works, we also do story circles, and have a youth program, is that what we're doing with that model is, sure that our HQ space really incorporates the entire city, but also what does that hyperlocal model look like? How can this artistic space really serve as a space that adds to the economic impact and the self-determination of the community through art education, through skills and development, through their ability to share their stories. On the next slide, you'll see our largest engagement happened last year when we turned 50, and we performed 50 original devised works in all of 50 Chicago wards in one day. And every single group had members from the ward performing in the ward, reflecting the stories from the ward. So to that end, that was probably our largest and most ambitious Herculean feat of community engagement, and really was historic in the city of Chicago. We also perform in parks. On the next slide, you'll see we perform in parks through Night Out in the Parks throughout the summer to also increase that accessibility, often bringing in our young people into those shows as well. And our latest performance there was called Still Here. As part of our 50 and 50, one of the things that we did was we asked our residents, what are the things that you require for joy and justice in your own life? And so if you see all of these little canopies that you see are everybody's responses to those needs and to those requirements that they have. And we were able to perform that in Millennium Park, downtown Chicago. So, to that end, specific to our young people, the biggest issue that they've been tackling lately has been environmental justice. So last year, we did a show called Parched, which was all about water justice and injustice, reflecting not only different communities here in Chicago, but also Puerto Rico and other countries of origin of our young people. And so they very much were impassioned by that project, which now informs our current show called Wasted, which is about trash. And, you know, who is disposable, what is disposable, and how does that affect our communities in Chicago? What is very unique about this particular show, and something that we are moving forward with, is that for every single one of our shows, we want to identify a community organization and partner, so that, you know, this work is not just about the content itself in the show proper, but also how is theater a tactic and an overall activist strategy or advocacy strategy. We are currently in partnership with the Little Village Environmental Justice Organization, who informs the work and also can utilize the theatrical piece, which was devised by our young people, to help further their mission and their work within their communities. And it is our intention to continue that work. And we also want to expand into the schools. We currently have out-of-school programming, but we want to move into the schools so that we can partner with them, not only to help them meet their learning goals, but also to create pathways for our middle school youth to come in and be able to develop this work themselves as well. And so the thing that I would probably leave all of you with is, you know, within your work, you know, how do we remain a tactic in an overall activist and advocacy strategy across multiple issues, including for your own community or the communities you serve? Engaging in dialogue not only with your students and your school administrators or other partners, you might have cross-sector partnerships, but how does that work, and how do those questions and how do those conversations inform how you are all operating and moving through the spaces in which you are right now? How do we sustain partnerships beyond the initial conversations? And how do we remain at the table as an essential pillar of how our city and state ecosystems operate? So even in my seat as the executive director at Free Street, I still remain active with the work happening in the city. Our artistic director is also part of the advisory council for the Department of Cultural Affairs. And we are very cognizant that the work that we do might be unique in the space currently, but we want this to be the norm. And so the more involved that we can be in those conversations, both at the grass tops and at the grassroots, we feel like that work and that agenda can move forward. And also, what conversations remain to be had? To me, these are the essential questions that I am constantly wrestling with as we move forward and we do our annual planning. And my hope is that these are questions and these are journeys that are helpful for all of you. Thanks so much.
Great. Thank you so much, Carla. And if folks want to reach out to you directly, they can do so on through the contact information on the screen. Now we'd like to have a little bit of discussion, and I have a few questions, and if others on the webinar would like to ask a question, please feel free to type it into the chat box, and we'll be sure to get it to Carla. Carla, though, I want to kind of start with one of the items that you talked about was relevant to sort of an ethnography that was created by collaboration amongst the stakeholders that you were working with to address the needs that they explored in their own communities. So could you talk a little bit about that and how that sort of sets your theater making up as a teaching artist or as an organization to really touch on the needs that are top of mind for people in your community?
Sure. So both for our multi-generational collective, our youth collective, our youth ensemble, and other stakeholders, we hold either workshops or brainstorming sessions where we have a facilitated discussion that helps, one, have everyone in the room connect with each other, but then gets them comfortable enough to really talk about and explore the issues that are top of mind for them. And so it is within that process that, we will see a whole slate of issues kind of bubble up. And it is from there that we identify the key issue that we will be focusing on for this particular season. And so to that end, then we go out into the communities and say, or, we host something in our HQ, we've leveraged social media, we make calls to people that we've partnered with in the past, we reach out to our own networks. We really try to cast as wide a net as possible, often sometimes even going door to door, particularly to engage folks in interacting with us. And we develop those workshops and really collect those stories. Often from there, a few folks will identify that they would like to be even more involved. And sometimes that is just as an advisor or as somebody that is sharing their story even more or bringing more people to the table to share their stories, or it is to actually be in the play itself. And so, we find that is, we see a lot of organizations that do community engagement, and it really is kind of a parachuting in. I want to gather all of the information, and then I'm going to go away, and I'm going to make this story through my own interpretation of what this looks like. But we really want to our focus is to do the work in partnership with the communities that we aim to reflect.
That's fantastic. So when you're forming those sort of cross-sector partnerships, where do you start? We looked at a few models around kind of naming a shared goal and having open communications channels. But what would be your sort of practical advice for folks who want to collaborate with someone, with a cross-sector partner outside of the theater education space?
Sure. I would take a look at what the story is that you want to tell. So, for us, our issues are very much, rooted in social justice work. But, this can go for any particular theme, whether it's mental health or whether it is, adoption or whether it is, name the issue. There's always an organization that is at the forefront of that work. If you are going hyper-local or if you want to highlight a particular geographic area, there is, some initial research that needs to be done to identify which organizations are the ones that might be a natural fit. And we also often get really lucky because we just have folks that are from the community that say, oh, you should really talk to these people. And that's exactly what we do when we say, hey, we're Free Street and we're doing this show on environmental justice and would love to get your take, and are you interested in partnering with us in this work? And this is what the partnership looks like. So it is in part a little bit of footwork, or it is really leveraging the network and the conversations that you're currently having to identify who those natural partners might be.
That's fantastic. And have you seen that translates to sort of greater support of arts and culture from people outside of the sector?
Absolutely. I think, in Chicago, it's very interesting now. I think in part because we have an arts-friendly mayor, but also, the arts are a little bit more, I would say, in this time right now, more top of mind. And I think, what our partners are seeing is that, there's a lot of work that an organization on its own can do in communicating out a message, right? There are only so many e-blasts you can send out, so many pamphlets you can deliver, so many one-pagers you can create. And for us, there are only so many plays and so many performances that we can have. So coming together and accessing new and different audiences in order to amplify a particular message is both beneficial to Free Street and beneficial to the community partners, because on both ends, it's an additional resource and additional build capacity.
Fantastic. And we have one of the attendees, Gail, is saying that she would hope to work with you, but that also that there are several issues that they would like to tackle with other community organizations. And so a lot of the examples that you gave were very helpful. So thank you for sharing,
excellent.
Gail. And, for others, I sort of wondered if there were any aha moments for you or stumbling blocks that you see in this work. I know one of our major goals in this session in particular was to kind of push the boundaries of what advocacy at the local level can look like. We don't want to just be kind of self-fulfilling in saying that we always just need to be asking for more theater education, more theater education, more theater education. Obviously, that is one of our goals and the things that we would like to see. However, working together, because theater education can be a solution for others, we're both tackling the issues that are facing our communities in a collaborative way and building larger goodwill so that people actually see the impact, not just hear about the impact of theater education. So I hope that that shift in frame is apparent in the way that we've structured this conversation. We're wondering about exit strategies. I find this really interesting with a community that are ethical and responsible. To say that not every program runs forever due to funding or other things like that, but wrapping it up can often be difficult. And Carla, I'll pose that question to you, but I'll also tune in myself to say that, naming a sunset period is really, really meaningful. I was actually just in New York City with a very large cultural institution that worked with a number of community-based organizations over a 3-year period of time. And, they received a ton of funding for this project. And one of the things that they did that I found that we all can learn from was truly sunsetting the program when it was done, when it served its purpose and the programmatic mission was achieved. But what they did is they didn't just end the program. They spent the last 6 months of the work bringing together all of the various resources, learnings, and outcomes, documenting that, and creating a resource for the entire field. So they built a website, hosted materials, and so forth. And so to your question about sort of ethically and responsibly ending something, it really did ramp down the funding so that no one was dependent, but also leverage that collective wisdom of the collaboration to help move the field forward. The program itself was called Create Justice, and you can learn more at createjustice.org. Carla, do you have any examples of the sunsetting of programs and how to navigate those partnerships in that way?
Yeah, I definitely think that clear communication with partners is very important. So for us, particularly with this partnership with the Little Village Environmental Justice Organization, there are regular check-ins and regular communications about capacity, and also kind of the run. We tailor things to the run of the show. And so we say, here are the dates where Wasted will be playing. We'll have performances of Wasted, and here is the time period that we're doing this. And so we're very clear about what those timelines are, particularly when you're asking for the energy of young people within the work, because often their capacity is even more limited than ours and are limited to program time. With that being said, they identify particular moments of engagement and events that, we can go to, and we certainly work with them around that. But when we do sunset, it's always, semi-predetermined, and we would rather give an extension than abruptly end something. And often, like Parched last year was extended. And so it is just about regular communication and just kind of giving folks an understanding of what timelines are. That's very similar to an academic year. Similar to a season. And what ends up happening with our young people is that they often begin to partner with those organizations themselves, either through internships or through other work. But the key component here is just communicating timelines and capacity. So that way, you're not abruptly ending a program or ending a partnership, but they understand the amount of time they have with you for this specific project.
I think to add on to that too, to go back to sort of that key lesson about partnerships, that, the relationships are really built through trust, and to say that building a relationship, particularly between individuals, not just institutions, is really important. That, that communication and that personal connection does not end when the project ends.
No,
So
that's
to
right.
remain in touch and to continue to invite those folks to your galas and openings and exhibitions and things of that nature, even though you may not be
Mhm.
working on a project at that time, continues to build that relationship. That's just a real practice.
That's exactly right. Yeah.
Well, fantastic. Thank you so much. If you have further questions, please feel free to get in touch. We'll bring this to a close. This series now has 2 elements of it completed. Please save the date for March 9th, this same day of the week and time, to look at making the case for theater education with the government. We're going to be specifically looking at state and federal strategies towards advocacy and case making for theater education, particularly in one of our busiest months in state capitals and in Washington, D.C., around advocacy for theater education. Save the date for March 9th. Our goals today were to examine the connections between theater education and other sectors, to interrogate effective partnerships, and to identify actionable steps to take in your school and in your community. I hope that we covered all of those things today. And I thank you for being here with us. If you have any further questions, please feel free to reach out to me. I'd be more than happy to answer them for you or connect you with the resources that you might be looking for. With that, I hope you have a great day. Thank you so much.